The Carpenter and the Cradle. A History Weaver Adventure, Book 1, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 2. A small cluster of 5, seeming a little hesitant, approached the nurses' station of Cheriton Hospital. That is, 4 of the 5 approached a little hesitantly. Lady Cromarty seldom acted hesitantly in any situation. "We're here about the young girl who was struck by an automobile on Eversley Road in Beaver Row yesterday," Lady Cromarty said imperiously to the nurse at the desk. "My name is Lady Cromarty. I was the one to find her. I witnessed the accident. We're here to see the girl. If she's able to have visitors, that is," Mr. Eagles said, hastily joining Lady Cromarty. "Yes, I think so," the auburn-haired nurse said uncertainly. "I haven't heard that she can't have." "What room, please?" This from Lady Cromarty. "Room 16. "Thank you, young woman." Paul Eagles said, "What can you tell us about her condition? Is she still unconscious?" The nurse looked a little unsure as to how much information she could impart, but there was no sense in hiding a fact the little group would soon find out for themselves. "She's conscious." "How is she? Is she stable? She must have had a head injury in order to be knocked out like she was, I suppose." The nurse appeared to deliberate within herself again. "She's not in any immediate danger," she said at length. "She has a broken arm and leg. She doesn't seem to have any internal injuries, but she is suffering from concussion, so please don't overstay your visit." "Thank you, we won't," Paul said. The group was halfway down the hallway by the time the nurse caught up with them. "Wait a minute," she called. They came back to her. "I might as well tell you," she said. "She's conscious, but she hasn't spoken. Don't expect her to say anything to you. It might do her some good for you to talk to her, especially you girls. Maybe you can get her to talk to you. Maybe she'll be more willing to talk to someone her own age. The doctor isn't sure why she isn't speaking. There doesn't seem to be any damage to her vocal organs. It may be a result of the head injury. She'll need some more testing to determine the extent of the injuries." "What can you tell us about the girl? Does anyone know who she is yet?" Paul asked. The nurse shook her head. "We were hoping you, Lady Cromarty, did you say, might be able to give us a little information. We haven't even known what name to put on her admittance forms. Is there anything else you've thought of that could help us, Lady Cromarty?" "I told the police everything I knew, which was very little," Lady Cromarty admitted. "Her name might be Georgie Green," June put in, and Lady Cromarty frowned at her. "Pure speculation," she said. "Not really," June said. "It makes sense that she might have been trying to tell us who she is." "She said something to you after you found her?" They had the nurse's undivided attention now. "I didn't hear anything about it." "I mentioned it to the police," Lady Cromarty defended herself. "At one point, while we were waiting for the ambulance, the girl opened her eyes and said, 'Georgie Green.' At least, that's what it sounded like. That was all. There was nothing to be told from it. I noticed that she had a rucksack with her. Was there nothing in her bag to identify her?" "Not that I saw," said the nurse, dropping her guard for a moment. "All that was in the backpack were a very few clothes, some bills and change, and a little bit of junk food. Oh, and one piece of notepaper with some doodling on it. No wallet, no identifying papers of any kind, no driver's license. Of course, she looks too young to drive anyway. I suppose I shouldn't have told you," she said, suddenly catching herself. "But you're involved if anyone is." "Sounds like a runaway," June muttered to July, who nodded. "Well, Georgie Green, is it?" the nurse said to June. "You're very likely right, and it is her name. We might as well put it on her forms. It's better than calling her Jane Doe. We haven't known what to call her. Maybe if we can call her her proper name, she'll start responding." The chatty nurse disappeared back behind the nurse's station, and June pushed open the door to room 16. Georgie was lying perfectly still under the thin hospital blanket. She must have been breathing, but no motion betrayed it. One hand rested on top of the other in the cast that lay above the blanket, and her face had no hint of color in it. For a second, June's heart dropped. Was she dead, after all? But she opened her deep blue eyes and turned her head when the group approached her bedside. June couldn't help but notice the fringe of thick, dark lashes that made the eyes look even wider, and she couldn't help but interpret the look in the wide eyes as alarm. Georgie said nothing. Good thing the nurse had warned them that Georgie hadn't spoken, so the group was prepared to carry on conversation without expecting any answer. "Hey there, young lady," Paul Eagles spoke first. The mass of brown curls turned on the pillow to face the opposite wall away from the group. The 5 exchanged looks, raising eyebrows at each other. June jumped in with, "How are you feeling?" The silence needed filling somehow. No response, but June charged on ahead. "That's a silly question after you've been hit by a car. Of course you're feeling terrible. At least, I would be," she babbled. More silence. "Dad?" June looked at him questioningly as if to say, "What do we do now?" He moved toward Georgie's bed. "Young lady, we don't know you. We don't know your situation. We don't even know your name for sure, but we're pulling for you. We want you to know that. We don't know where your family is or why you're all alone, but if there's ever anything we can do for you." His voice trailed off, low and a little bit quavery. The girl on the bed must be around the same age as his June in July. The blue eyes didn't turn from the opposite wall. "Why don't you just talk to her?" he said in an undertone to his girls. "Just about anything. Maybe the more she hears, the sooner she'll respond." "What do I say?" June hissed. "I don't know what to say." "Tell her about yourself. That should keep you going for a while. You can talk about yourself for hours," her dad teased. "Okay, fine. Well, my name's June Eagles. I'm 15. That's my dad, Paul Eagles. This is my friend, Fern Mann. This is our neighbor, Lady Cromarty. She's the one who found you. And this is my twin, July. She's 15, but I guess you could have guessed July's age, seeing she's my twin," June said, laughing at herself. "As you can tell, July and I aren't exactly identical." "In fact," July put in, "we could hardly be more different." "Right," June said, warming to the subject and forgetting to address the injured girl. "We both inherited different traits from our parents. July inherited my mom's red hair and my dad's tallness and skinniness, and I've got my dad's dark hair, but I'm short and not exactly thin, like my mom. At least, I'm sure I'll be built just like her one day. Not that she's just short and not skinny. Kind of average-ish, I guess," June said. "And I'm the excitable one, like Mom. July's the calm one, like Dad. And June loves books, like Dad. I'm dyslexic, like Mom. I hate to read and I hate school. But July and Mom are both really good with their hands. If something goes wrong with the car, my dad always has to get my mom to look at it," June said, laughing. "But don't forget that I'm the better cook," her dad added, pretending to have his feelings hurt. "Oh yeah, that's for sure. My mom hates to cook." "But your mom's food always tastes so good," Fern Mann, the 5th member of the cluster of visitors, put in. "If you like the flavor of burnt," July said. By this time, they were all relaxed and laughing. "There are 2 more girls in our family," said June. "I have to tell you the story of our names because they're kind of strange. May is my oldest sister, but she's called Maylia, or we usually call her Maylie. She can't be just May, or things would get confusing when we're around Grandma May. May is my grandma's name, too. My mom's name is April, and she named her first girl after my dad's mom, so when she found out she was having twins, and there was already an April and a May in our family, she thought it would be funny if we were June and July, if we ended up being girls, which we did end up being, obviously." "Hilarious name choices," July said dryly. "I've heard people refer to us as the family with all the months. When June and I were 5, Mom found out she was having another baby, and she realized she had no choice but to call it August. Boy or girl, the baby had to be August. So that's our little sister. We call her Gussie, but she hates it. Everyone else has to call her August. Only to us, she's Gussie. She has the family red hair, too, and Maylie's dark, like Dad. We're pretty evenly split down the middle for taking after either Mom or Dad in different ways. Maylie's another bookworm. Gussie isn't really yet. By rights, she should be dyslexic like Mom and me, but she just seems in the middle. Not a bookworm, but just normal. She is crazy, though, like Mom and June. Maylie's quiet, like me and Dad. Well, sometimes I'm quiet." July flushed pink at having said so much in one go. Fern spoke up. "And like June told you, I'm Fern Mann. I'm 14. I'm a good friend of June and July's, and in my family there's just me and my little brother, Christopher, plus my parents. Christopher's only 3, and I think he's a brat, even if these guys think he's adorable. He is adorable, Fern's friends vetoed her. And while we're explaining about names and nicknames, you might hear these people call me Fun. There's a story behind that one, too. When my family moved here from Vancouver when I was in grade 1, I still couldn't say the R sound. I had to introduce myself in front of the class, and the whole class called me Fun for an entire year because that's what they thought my name was. I was too shy to correct them, and even if I'd tried, I still wouldn't have been able to tell them what my name really was. It wasn't until grade 2 when we were all reading that I could write my name so my friends could read it and know who I really was. We weren't making fun. No pun intended. June jumped in. We really thought your name was Fun Man. I loved it. It was such a great name. I used to wish my name was Fun instead of June. Why Miss Skinner didn't correct us or why we didn't notice that she called you Fern, I don't know. Little kids are tuned out anyways. The girls suddenly ran out of things to say. At the same moment, they all became aware that the blue eyes had closed some time ago. They looked at each other uncertainly. Lady Cromarty didn't volunteer the history of her name, which would have made for an interesting tale. In fact, Lady Cromarty had said nothing at all. An uncomfortable silence suddenly reigned over the room. Even the hum of the stark hospital lighting was audible. "We'll leave you in peace now," Mr. Eagles said to the still form on the hospital bed, taking charge once more. "We just didn't want you to be alone in here and think that no one cared. You've got us rooting for you, that's all." The 5 visitors turned and left the room with its depressingly neutral colors and its distinctively hospital-like smells. "That's so sad," June whispered. "I hate leaving her all alone in this place, not knowing anyone, not even being able to speak." And Lady Cromarty blew her nose delicately into a handkerchief. Coe raised his head and wished he could massage his sore neck. He wasn't sure what hurt worse, his wrists and ankles where the cords bit into them unrelentingly, or the rest of his body, from the unfortunate position he had no choice but to occupy on the hard ground, with his hands tied behind his back. He wriggled around until he was near the tree and pulled himself up using only his stomach muscles until he was sitting with his back against the rough bark. The drone of men's voices around the fire seemed endless. He couldn't hear what they were saying, though he listened with all his might. He spoke just a little of their language anyway. He kept all his senses attuned to pick up any information he could. He didn't know what they had planned for him, but he suspected the discussion wasn't turning in his favor. The leader now seemed to be shouting at someone, and Coe didn't know if that boded well for him or not. At least if the men fell to fighting amongst themselves, that meant they weren't perfectly agreed on what to do with him. On the other hand, if the leader was angered by his men, he might act rashly. Coe might run out of time to think of a plan of escape. But all the time in the world might not be enough to think up a plan of escape. What could he do? He thought of sawing through the cords, using something sharp or rough like the tree bark maybe. But testing the cord, he knew that would never work. It was too thick, and it was tied too tightly for him to hope to wriggle a hand free. The pain in his head, like his skull was splitting apart, told him how he'd been captured. Too bad they'd knocked him out before tying him. If he'd been conscious at the time, he'd have tried holding his hands in such a way as to keep the bonds looser. The only idea that came to him now was to gradually edge away, using his body worm-style to crawl. It would never work, of course. Unless the men argued all night, they'd soon notice his absence and come after him. Even on foot, they could move a lot faster than he could wriggle, and they'd have lights. He'd have only his own cumbersome body with his arms and legs incapacitated. But the idea began to look irresistible. He had to try something. No one seemed to notice that he was even awake. He was sure they were disputing his fate around the fire, but the men seemed to have almost forgotten his presence. He'd try rolling. That would be faster than wriggling, and he was lying on a downhill slope. He could get up a little speed doing it that way. Good thing he had a strong stomach. The motion may have made a weaker stomach sick. The rolling was working. He was picking up more speed than he'd expected. It made a little noise as the dry grass flattened under his body, but the men were all shouting now and not likely to hear anything else. His heart jumped in fear slightly as he rolled downhill in the darkness, unable to see where the motion was taking him. But did it matter? It was bound to be better than where he'd been. Gradually, he came to a natural stop where the land leveled off. He lay on his back, his hands still tied under him. He stared at the clouds moving across the face of the moon for a minute, till his head stopped spinning. But his heart jumped in his chest. He could hear the men. Their voices no longer sounded like they were arguing, but they were still shouting. These shouts had the ring of urgency in them. They were on a mission. No need to guess what their mission was. He could tell they were on the move now, and their voices were getting closer. He rolled onto one side to take stock of his surroundings. His heart jumped even higher when he saw where he was. The land had leveled off just in time to avoid dropping him over a cliff. Away below him, he could see the sparkle of water in the moonlight. He was on the edge of a ravine with the river at the bottom of it. It wasn't a sheer drop, and it wasn't a high drop, but it was high and sheer enough that Coe was sure he would have been injured in the fall if the ground hadn't leveled enough to stop his progress. He sat up and looked in all directions. There was no cover to get behind, nothing but tall, dead grass every way he looked. His best bet was to lie perfectly still in the grass and hope the men didn't stumble on him. Within a few minutes, he realized it was an unfounded hope. He could see the bobbing of the lights. They seemed to be heading directly for him. Of course, the men were following the trail of flattened grass his rolling had made. The sounds of pursuit neared even closer and closer, and a roar from one of the men told Coe he'd been spotted. The signal caused the others to charge at him. Pure blind instinct took over Coe's body. He began rolling again, this time right over the cliff's edge. As quickly as he could, he changed from a roll to a feet-first slide. Rocks and roots and thorns dug into him as he slid. But he was putting distance between himself and his captors. The bold move had apparently stumped his pursuers. He was vaguely aware that no one else was braving the descent to go after him. Why would they? At the bottom was a river, and he was bound hand and foot. If the fall didn't do him in, the river would.